The tobacco industry has continued to market its deadly products to youth, despite its current claims to the contrary. It preys on young people in an attempt to make smoking and other forms of tobacco consumption cool and even fashionable. At every opportunity, they attempt to block effective regulation. And whether it is beedi workers or tobacco farmers, they work to keep these workers poor and dependent upon them. The campaign was founded to fight back against industry tactics. Our organization supports proven policies that reduce the consumption of tobacco and ultra-processed food. Today, we wanted to draw the similarities between these two industries and how we can figure out the most effective strategies and approaches to fight back against both. Next slide. This slide about our experience with e-cigarette company Juul in the United States illustrates step by step how the industry markets harmful products to vulnerable people, addicts them, makes it cool, and then continues to fight against any kind of effective regulation. But these tactics are not different from the ones used by companies selling and making ultra-processed foods. They too market their unhealthy products to vulnerable consumers like youth. They too effectively block effective nutrition policies, and they too exploit workers in an effort to sell unhealthy food. So I'm pleased today to be joined by three outstanding panelists. First, Meg Reardon, Vice President of Research at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, will talk about how flavored tobacco products are putting a new generation of kids at youth. Monica Andreas, Director of ACT Brazil, will talk about tobacco and ultra-processed food industry interference in policy. And finally, Jualo Romero, Project Manager at FION Mexico, will present on between consumption and production of food and tobacco, an introductory analysis. Meg, over to you.
Thanks, Yolanda. Good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. Hi there. It's nice to be with you this morning. I'm glad so many of you could join us. As Yolanda said, my name is Meg Reardon. I'm Vice President for Research at the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids. We advocate for policies and programs to prevent tobacco use and to help tobacco users quit. And these policies and programs are as important as ever because the tobacco industry is not going away. They continue to aggressively market their products, to always innovating and looking for ways to recruit new users, to sustain addiction, and to discourage quitting. And you know, most of their success has been rightfully attributed to their successful marketing campaigns, their sophisticated marketing campaigns, but the characteristics and design of the products themselves are critically important. And the characteristics of tobacco products are no accident. Everything about them is designed with an explicit purpose. And this morning, I'm going to be talking about the use of flavors, how the tobacco industry has used flavors for decades to grow its customer base. And flavors are primarily used in products to attract young people. And the flavors, just like in food and drink products, flavors improve the taste. They make products more appealing. They certainly make tobacco products more appealing. And they reduce the harshness of tobacco products. And this makes the tobacco products more appealing and easier for young people to use. Next slide, please. So as early as the 1970s, the tobacco companies were discussing the benefits of sweet flavors. And you can see some of the quotes here on this slide from tobacco industry documents. And their internal documents and their public statements show that the industry wasn't really just interested in switching, in having current customers switch products. They were really interested in attracting new users, primarily young people. And so in 1972, this memo from Brown and Williamson says, you know, they reviewed a new concept for a youth cigarette, a sweet flavor cigarette. It's a well-known fact that teenagers like sweet products. Honey might be considered. And an RJR interoffice memo from 1974 says, make a cigarette, which is obviously youth-oriented. For example, a flavor which would be candy-like, but give the satisfaction of a cigarette. And Cherry Skull from U.S. Tobacco. Cherry Skull is for somebody who likes the taste of candy, if you know what I'm saying. Next slide, please. So more recently, we've seen new products, different products be introduced with flavors. In 2005, R.J. Reynolds introduced this Camel Exotic Blends line, which you see a couple of the ads here. They came in flavors like Twist a Lime, Kauai Colada, Warm Winter Toffee. Colorful ads for these cigarettes, these flavored cigarettes, appeared in youth, in magazines popular with youth, like Rolling Stone and Sports Illustrated. In cigars and smokeless tobacco products have also been introduced in a variety of sweet flavors. You can see some of these here: grape, banana, apple, and berry blend. Next slide, please. And menthol, is perhaps the original flavored tobacco product. The industry has used menthol for decades to hook new users. Menthol cools and numbs the throat, reducing the harshness of tobacco. In the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, reviewing a robust, comprehensive set of scientific studies and evidence, have found that menthol makes it easier to start smoking, makes the cigarettes more addictive, and harder to quit. Menthol cigarettes are popular among young people. Half of youth who have ever smoked cigarettes started with menthol cigarettes, and 85% of African-American smokers use menthol cigarettes. Next slide, please. And the preference for menthol cigarettes among African-Americans is really no accident. It's the result of decades of targeted advertising from the tobacco companies. Tobacco companies advertised menthol cigarettes in magazines popular with African Americans. They gave away free samples in neighborhoods that had a high African American population. They sponsored music and events that would be widely attended by African Americans. And then of course there's, at the point of sale, there's lots of buy one, get one, and other coupons. So really the industry preyed on the African-American community, as well as youth, to build their customer base and attract more customers. Next slide, please. So cigarettes with characterizing flavors, except menthol, are now prohibited in the United States. That was part of the 2009 Tobacco Control Act, which passed Congress and was signed into law. It gave the U.S. Food and Drug Administration authority over tobacco products. And so while flavored cigarettes are no longer, aside from menthol, can no longer be sold, that prohibition doesn't exist for other tobacco products. And you can see here the wide array of products, often colorfully packaged. They're widely available in convenience stores, online, and other tobacco retailers. And, some of these flavors are the flavors you would see in a candy store. Cotton candy, gummy bear, Pop Rocks for e-cigarettes, and berry, cherry, dynamite, and chocolate for cigars. And candy flavored is actually really an appropriate term to call these products because a chemical analysis showed that the same flavored chemicals used in flavored cigars and flavored smokeless tobacco product, those same flavor chemicals are used in some candy and drink products like Kool-Aid, Jolly Ranchers, and Lifesavers. Next slide, please. So in recent years, we've really seen an explosion of flavored products in the US. As of 2017, there were more than 15,000 unique e-cigarette flavors available. Cigars now come in hundreds of flavors and can be as cheap as 3 for 99 cents. And we see that while overall cigarette sales are declining, the share of cigarette sales that are menthol cigarettes has been increasing. Next slide, please. And the growing market of flavored tobacco products is no accident. The tobacco industry knows that flavored products appeal primarily to young people. And these sweet products have fueled the popularity of e-cigarettes and cigars among youth. 4 out of 5 kids who have ever used a tobacco product started with a flavored product. Next slide, please. And not surprisingly, the youth e-cigarette epidemic here in the US coincided with the explosion of these sweet flavored e-cigarette products. You can see the rapid rise once Juul was introduced from 2016 to 2019, the rise in e-cigarette use among high schoolers. And while e-cigarette use has declined in recent years, it still remains a serious public health concern here, with 14% of high schoolers using e-cigarettes and over 2.5 million youth using e-cigarettes. And 85% of these youth e-cigarette users are using flavored products. Next slide, please. And 7 out of 10 current youth e-cigarette users say they use them because of the flavors. And of concern is that many youth perceive that flavored tobacco products are not as harmful. It tastes good, it's sweet, it smells good, it can't be that harmful, right? And that's what youth believe. Next slide. And so like e-cigarettes, youth cigar use, especially the smaller cigars and cigarillos, are driven by a wide variety. The use among youth is driven by a wide variety of flavors. Cigars are the second most popular tobacco product among youth in the US, and over 500,000 youth use cigars. 3/4 of youth say they use the cigars because they come in flavors they like. Next slide, please. So what are we doing about it? Well, I'm happy to say that there are opportunities for action. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration here in the US, has proposed rules to prohibit menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. We're pushing FDA to finalize and implement these rules without delay. And we're also working to build a diverse, wide and diverse support for these rules. And of course, the industry is working hard to oppose these rules. So we're also doing all that we can to counter this industry opposition. We're also urging FDA to reject all applications for flavored e-cigarettes, given the threat these products pose to young people. And to date, FDA has denied applications for all flavored e-cigarettes, including menthol e-cigarettes, but they have yet to make decisions on products that have the largest market share. In Congress, we're working to build support for FDA action, both on the proposed rules as well as taking action against flavored e-cigarettes. And at the state and local level, we're working to pass legislation to prohibit the sale of all flavored tobacco products, including menthol cigarettes, flavored cigars, and flavored e-cigarettes. And we have made some progress. 5 states have enacted laws prohibiting the sale of flavored tobacco products, or flavored e-cigarettes. 2 of those 5 states also prohibit menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars. And more than 360 localities across the country have implemented restrictions on flavored tobacco products. So thank you for your time. Look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Meg. That was very thorough. The targeting of vulnerable populations, increasing already existing health disparities. One thing the food industry does is hide the harms of its products through association with healthy things. So, for example, it might say market sugary cereal as rich in fiber. What tactics have you seen that the e-cigarette companies use to hide their harmful products?
Yeah, thanks, Yolanda. Good question. They use lots of different tactics and strategies. I would say a couple of things we've seen them do is they tout that the e-cigarettes are received GRAS, generally recognized as safe designation. Of course, that's for ingestion, not inhalation. So they are not recognized as safe for how they're used. When it came to COVID, we saw e-cigarette companies touting the use of e-cigarettes to keep, to relieve stress, to help you stay sane, to relieve anxiety. So that's another piece that they tend to tout. They also send signals that e-cigarettes can help you quit smoking, when contrary to the evidence that is the case. And they also just promote the idea that e-cigarettes are just water vapor, right? They don't totally hide the fact that they contain high amounts of nicotine and harmful chemicals. And then lastly, I guess I'll just say that all e-cigarette companies, as well as tobacco companies more generally, are really touting this a harm reduction approach, right? That they care about the health of their users, that they're looking for building a better tomorrow, and that their products can help you get there and help us get there. And obviously we know that's not the case.
Thanks, Meg. The tobacco industry and the e-cig industry are working from the same playbook, it seems. We're going to turn to Monica now, who's going to talk a little bit about how these industries interfere in the policy process. Monica?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I will say about this theme that is tobacco and ultra-processed food industry interference and policy. So please, the next slide. When we start discussing about the interference of industries like food industry and tobacco industry, it's important to mention the commercial determinants of health, because it's a kind of a recognition that private sector has a major influence on health through their systems, practice, and pathways, with commercial actors drive human health and health inequity. And here you have some corporate tactics that they are using to try to influence lawmaking and regulatory measures, like the lobby, trying to influence this kind of new initiatives, the use of junk science, the corporate social responsibility initiatives, litigation, and the use of front groups. Through that, they try also to manipulate the public opinion, trying to get a better public image of their industries, try also to get some intimidation, especially through the litigation, and guarantee the profits of the corporate industries. So the next slide, please. And here we have two examples from Brazil about the tactics related with lobby, where industries work to capture branches of government in order to prevent or weaken regulations of their products. Here we have two news that were published regarding Anvisa, which is our national health surveillance agency that regulate products as tobacco and food products. Here we have a news saying that tobacco industry have a heavy lobby in the final stretch of the decision on electronic cigarettes. Because here in Brazil, we have a prohibition of sales of all the electronic device since 2009, but this regulation is being discussed by Anvisa. And we have here the image of a former director of Anvisa who is currently working for BAT. And it's a powerful strategy because they try to influence her former peers and also have a strong impact on media to have someone who was a member of the board of directors of the National Health Surveillance Agency, and nowadays working in defense of the tobacco products. And another example is related with the food industry. When we discussed the front of package warning labels, we adopted a new model here in Brazil last year. And the news mentioned how the ultra-processed food industry manipulated Anvisa, the health surveillance agency, because we have here the image of the proposal signal used in the labeling, so with the triangles. The second one is with the magnificent glass, is the proposed model discussed in the public consultation. And finally, the third one is the approved model with a small magnificent glass alerting about the amount of sodium, fat, and sugar in the products. And we could notice that food industry tried to manipulate Anvisa through a report that mentioned all the tactics that they could use to try to influence this final decision. The next slide, please. Usually we can see that the Ministry of Agriculture usually supports the economic sector. So here we have also news showing that the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, reinforces the offensive to put down the Brazilian food guide. That is a very important tool that we use because the Brazilian food guide try to establish these categories like the ultra-processed food, the minimum processed food, and also the immature food to orient the population. And they try to put some arguments against the food guide. And also here, another example from tobacco industry, that the Ministry of Agriculture will defend tobacco production in COP9, the Conference of Parties. So we can see the Ministry of Agriculture usually supporting the economic sector. The next slide, please. And another field that we can see this kind of the use of the same arguments by both industries in the discussion of the taxes policies, because here in Brazil, we are discussing a tax reform, and we can see that both tobacco sector refuse the tax increase, and the food industry claims for tax relief, for example. And also we have industries defending lower rates for tobacco and food products in the tax reform. And we have here also an image from a campaign of tobacco industry saying that when we have an increase of taxes, the crime will benefit from it. The next, please. Here we have some examples about initiatives related with the corporate social responsibility strategies. For example, during the pandemics, we have some initiatives from tobacco and food industry, for example, with Philip Morris donating protection kits from 1,000 families in the south of Brazil. The other image we can see McDonald's donates sandwiches for hospital staff during the pandemics. Philip Morris Brazil donating 30,000 masks for population. And finally, discussing the issue of the contradiction that we have when a food industry like Coca-Cola is sponsoring the climate change international meeting. And it's something that we need to reflect and expose in order to discuss this kind of conflict of interest. And the same we can see in the tobacco industry attempt to participate of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and trying to connect their activities with the SDGs. So the private sector appropriates concepts such as sustainability, ESG, corporate social responsibility, without actually changing its practice, products, policies, governance, and business model. The next, please. And they try also to influence public opinion, media, and the policymakers through funding research, where data may be skewed in favor of commercial interests. And here we have two examples from Brazil, that we have a very well-known university that produced a report for tobacco industry when we were discussing about the additives ban. And this university published a report evaluating the socioeconomic effects of the additives ban. And it's clearly something related with the tobacco industry interest. This report was funded by tobacco industry related organizations. And we have also another study trying to do the same thing, evaluating the socioeconomic effects of the front of labeling, of package labeling related with food. And recently we have another study that says that obesity is more related with age, with socioeconomic issues, and not really with the ultra-processed food, for example. And so we have this new that food industry celebrates the polemic study. And the next, please. It's the final one, just saying that's not a coincidence. I do believe that food industry learned from tobacco industry, and nowadays I think they learn each other. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Monica. That was really thorough and incredibly helpful to see how the two industries use very, very similar tactics in order to advance and market their products, but also to interfere in policy, as you just described. You know, in the tobacco industry, as you well know, the industry uses front groups like tobacco farmers. Can you think of how the food and does the food highly ultra processed industry also use farmers, or are there other front groups we should be paying attention to?
Yes, thank you, Yolanda, for the question. I think they try to use the same argument of the impact on production, for example. It's not exactly the same because, for example, here in Brazil, we have a large production of tobacco leaves, and tobacco industry control all the supply chain. So they already have picket groups from farmers, for example, and send them to participate in meetings, to make demonstrations and something like that. And food industry, I think that's a bit different, but they also try to use the same arguments. Through, for example, the Parliament front of agriculture that oppose some measures in food policies, and also through civil society organizations like an institute that we have here that it's called Thinking Agro. That's something that they try to use the same arguments of the impact of production, but through these civil organizations and not direct from the farmers. But it's the same kind of strategy using different strategies.
Thanks, Monica. That's very helpful. Now we're going to turn to Paulo. And apologies to Paulo. I introduced her from Mexico, but actually she's from Colombia. So please, Paulo.
Muchísimas gracias. Agradezco al equipo de TFK y GAI por esta invitación. Es para mí un honor compartir en este webinar con mujeres tan destacadas. Bueno, quisiera comenzar mi presentación subrayando lo siguiente. Más allá de lo que ya sabemos en materia de salud pública, la correlación entre la producción y consumo de tabaco y alimentos y su correlato de tabaco y productos comestibles y bebibles ultraprocesados, no se ha estudiado esta relación de manera exhaustiva. Por lo tanto, esta exposición debe ser considerada justo como una invitación a profundizar en esa reflexión. Mi presentación intentará centrarse en algunos elementos de los impactos que sobre la alimentación tiene el tabaco, más particularmente en la producción agrícola. Dicho de otro modo, nos centramos más en el eslabón de la consecución de alimentos, como parte de lo que FIA en Colombia hemos venido definiendo como proceso alimentario. Y aquí valga la pena aclarar que quienes escuchan la traducción en inglés, cuando hablamos de proceso alimentario, no es lo mismo que procesamiento de alimentos o alimentos procesados. Acá hago referencia al complejo encadenamiento de alimentos, de los sucesos y las dinámicas que van de la consecución de alimentos hasta su consumo y la regeneración de las capacidades vitales, no solo humanas, que permiten reiniciar el proceso alimentario. Bien, esa misma diapositiva, gracias. ¿Qué relación tiene la producción y consumo de alimentos con el tabaco? Me centraré en dos relaciones y algunas de sus causas derivadas. La primera, al igual que como ha ocurrido en otras especies vegetales, el tabaco es un producto base y prácticamente irreemplazable de un poderoso sector de la agroindustria. Su producción suele ser en lógica de monocultivo y por lo tanto compite con la producción diversa de alimentos. Desde una perspectiva holística, al igual como sucede con los PCUs, el tabaco y la industria que sustenta, estos tienen graves efectos en la salud pública y van en contra de la agroecología. Miremos cómo. Siguiente diapositiva, por favor. Gracias. La primera relación que encontramos tiene que ver con el carácter mismo del monocultivo del tabaco. Al ser explotaciones de gran tamaño de un solo producto, tienden a emplear las mismas técnicas, métodos y paquetes productivos con impactos negativos como los siguientes. El primero, en su fase de producción, degrada los nutrientes del suelo, propicia la aparición de plagas, concentra y secuestra bienes comunes como la tierra y el agua, que deberían ser para la finalidad alimentaria. Y cuarto, reduce la disponibilidad alimentaria en la región o en los territorios. Uno segundo es que incentiva la desforestación. Utilizan paquetes tecnológicos como pesticidas y fungicidas que tienen efectos nocivos sobre la salud humana y la salud planetaria, sobre todo en las mujeres y las niñas y los niños. Por ejemplo, en Colombia es uno de los pocos países en los que el glifosato no ha sido prohibido y su uso se ha incentivado. Sabemos que con el cultivo del tabaco se presenta la enfermedad del tabaco en verde a causa de la absorción de nicotina a través de la piel y afectaciones pulmonares en el proceso de curado. Muchas de las personas afectadas son igualmente mujeres y niñas que trabajan en esas plantaciones. Una tercera relación es al competir con la producción de alimentos, el tabaco, y afectar la diversidad biológica y alimentaria, coayudan a la homogenización de la dieta y a la profundización de la dieta corporativa. Por ejemplo, de acuerdo con la FAO, sabemos que están creciendo los cultivos de tabaco en el sur global, sobre todo en África, ya que se están endureciendo reglamentaciones para estos cultivos en muchos países y las tabacaleras buscan países con normatividades más laxas, es decir, más tierras y recursos
More
para
land and more resources for less food products and real food. These practices of monocrops and inducing the consumption of tobacco as well as UPPs is due to a racist and patriarchal rationale, given that from its origins, these crops have been linked to slavery and colonization-based methods, which in a way still persist. The tobacco industry, as well as the UPP industry, mobilize unequal power dynamics. We can see some illustrations here. First, the defense of the interests of these industrial sectors and the consumption that they foster, which are strongly protected by corporate capture, including the component of industry interference, what we saw earlier on the prior during the prior presentations. This proves their ability to co-opt processes when making decisions. Secondly, we find the ways of living, labor rights, and the care economy, understood as an aspirational economy, which has nothing to do with the patriarchal economy. They are seriously affected amongst the populations that have been forced because of economic models to work on these monocrops. A clear example is that here in Colombia, we have worked with rural communities that have worked for sugarcane plantations. They provide this input to the UPP. They provide this raw material to the UPP industry. Particularly, women have been affected by the impact from social and environmental conflicts derived from this. Many of them had less salaries for their work in relation to men who also work for those same sugar mills. In addition, labor conditions are linked to exploitation, informal labor, and little social benefit. The monocrop of sugarcane poisoned their family crops and community crops as well. It polluted the waters from the rivers and made many of these women and children ill. And finally, through land grabbing and the intensification of monocrops, they ended up displacing the native communities as well as the planting of the crops that they usually grew in the past, so losing not only the biological characteristics by the loss of their traditional crops, deteriorating and weakening their identity and organizational power amongst these communities. And thirdly, there are similar practices when it comes to tobacco and the production of food, which lead to changes in lifestyles and the food matrix. In fact, both the tobacco industry as well as the UPP industry pressure towards the consumption of unhealthy products which are not good for the environment or for human beings. They are using narratives which are presumably environmental today, for instance, with the use of e-cigarettes and meat, certain types of meat. However, as Ipafood has argued, these monocrops have a negative impact given that they generate less resilience by the ecosystems because of climate change, which discredits such a narrative. With respect to the impacts derived from these industries, we see that the holders of rights as individuals and in nature for these industries are merely consumers, therefore valued only as parties being subjects or objects with commodity-based purposes. For instance, amongst human beings, ENTs are a part of the consequences of this consumption. Individuals affected by these diseases are victims individually isolated, given that as part of the hegemonic discourse, they believe that they are the ones to be blamed for this situation. Obesity and lung cancer are a clear example of the tip of the iceberg of a set of consequences that these inequality relationships consolidate. They are expressed in serious violations of human rights, such as health, the environment, information, and food. As a result of this, people lose their ability for agency to defend their rights. For instance, as Meg showed us, boys and girls and young people are the victims of advertising and marketing used by these industries. Their efforts are targeted towards expanding their addictions and what is derived from this. Regarding the ecology, the impact for future generations derived from these industries is significant, given that we are affecting ecosystems and leaving a huge destruction, deteriorating nature, and the possibilities of positive resilience required to overcome the multiple crises that we undergo as a human species and as a planet. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Paulo. I appreciate that. In the previous presentation, Monica raised the question about how much both the tobacco and the food industry has been able to influence both ministries of agriculture and ministries of economy at the national level, and then even UN system organizations. What's our best approach for trying to curbing the impact they're having, particularly with these two industries where they get a very friendly hearing?
Con estas entidades.
Bien, gracias, Yolanda,
Thank
por
you
la
very
pregunta.
much, Yolanda, for your
Mira,
question.
yo creo
Well, I believe
que
that the approach has to be geared towards moving forward in terms of passing regulations in the field of demand, as well as profound environmental regulations from production itself, as well as incentivizing the production of food focused on agroecology, which allow for promoting the holders of promoting human rights for the holders of these rights, tackling the problem of obesity without pressuring to guarantee production, access, and consumption of real food. And in the long run, we would lose with respect to the perverse effect from these corporations if we don't tackle both the regulations for consumption as well as the regulation for production and all of the ways of having political, legal influence.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you to Meg, Monica, and Paulo for these great presentations. They provide us an opportunity to really open up the discussion today. So a huge round of thank you to all of them. We have a couple of minutes now for discussion, and there are some questions in the Q&A box, and we'd like to take some of those. So let me start with the question about one from, is there a national or international model that shows the economic impact of tobacco consumption on health and expenditure? I think that's probably a question for you, Paulo.
¿Me puedes repetir la pregunta, por favor?
Could you please repeat the question?
The question is there a national or international model that shows the economic impact of tobacco, both its production and consumption, on health expenditures, including loss of productivity, environmental cost, and loss of food? Basically, what data do we have that explicitly shows this economic impact of tobacco?
Pues en este momento no tengo unos datos
Well,
específicos.
at this point in time, I don't have specific data on the economic impact. However, there is definitely a direct relationship between the damage to common goods, to community economies, to farmers' economies, which affect monocultures, monocrops of tobacco, such as tobacco, for example, and also the labor relations of the people who work there. They have a harmful effects on these economies, but we don't know whether this impact is global or not.
Thanks, fair enough. Meg, you saw a question in there about global alignment of why isn't there more global alignment and consensus around ends and ends policy, particularly when it comes to youth. You want to take a stab at that? And we also might turn over to Monica to also answer that question.
Sure. I mean, I think some of the strategies that are pursued overseas, tobacco control strategies, are difficult, if not impossible, for us to implement here in the US due to some of our First Amendment constraints. You know, it's clear that the tobacco industry will challenge anything that gets put in place. And I think when it comes to restricting some of the advertising and some of the other strategies that other places are pursuing, we just don't have that ability. I think not only will the industry challenge those policies, but they could quite likely be successful in court. And then I also think the political will on some strategies that don't represent, a First Amendment challenge. There's just not political support to move some of other strategies forward. So we're trying to put forward and promote and support what we think are the strongest policies that we think we can build support for and actually get implemented here in the US.
Monica?
Hi, Yolanda. Just a bit thing that I would like to add is related with the economic model. I just would like to mention about the model that is used by IEX. There is an Institute of Economics from Argentina that calculates the costs of tobacco impact on health, on retirement, and this kind of thing. So I just would like to mention that and suggest to the people that are asking about it to consult this this model of calculating economic costs. And regarding your last question, could you please repeat briefly the question about it's how to deal with these both challenges of food and tobacco industry? Sorry, Yolanda.
No, I think the questioner was asking, in tobacco and combustible products, there seems to be real global consensus about how to move forward, how to regulate it, what are the most effective strategies for doing so. And then there is some division in the public health sector about whether and to what extent we need to regulate e-cigarettes. So why do you think we have not had sort of global consensus in the same way that we've had with combustible tobacco products?
Yes. I think that is something related with also the historical entry of these products in the market, because we have different countries with different moments of regulations. For example, we have here in Brazil a regulation since 2009, but many countries didn't have any regulation about that before. So, and now, of course, we have the tobacco industry trying to put these products in the market in a strong way and trying to influence the countries to have this kind of permission allowed to the sales and the use and all of these without many strong regulations. So I believe that it's a challenge for the world community to discuss those issues with so different ways that the countries is trying to regulate those products. But also, I think that's important, the position that WHO is discussing. There is the need of having a consensus about the harmful of those products. There are not safe products, and also to get the stronger regulation as possible in each country. So I believe that it's kind of a good way to have a consensus considering the difference, but also to have the consensus that are not safe products, they are harmful, they can attract new consumers like youth, and also we have to have the stronger regulation as possible in each country. So I believe that could be my answer for that.
Yolanda, could I just add something?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah,
Meg.
I didn't understand the question to be focused on e-cigarettes. I would say that also, I don't know that other countries have had the youth. I mean, we saw youth use skyrocket after the introduction of Juul, and Juul was just such a blatant attempt to attract young people with not just, high nicotine products, blatant youth marketing, and then, the way they could conceal the product, right? And kids were using it in school. So I think that has really made the US potentially more, we're very concerned. We saw how quickly that could happen, right? Within just a matter of 2 years, youth use went up to of e-cigarettes went up to nearly 30%. And so I think where places that have not had that epidemic proportion, epidemic use of e-cigarettes may take we see them taking a potentially different approach.
Thanks, Meg. So one question that came up is interesting in the Q&A. For tobacco control advocates, there's just no potential for working at all with the industry. In fact, it's articulated in the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. But in the food space, it's a lot more complex. Would you guys speak to whether or not you see any opportunity of working with companies? Sometimes they want to reformulate, sometimes they want to come out with much less so-called harmful variations of the food. Are your reactions similar to that? And particularly, I'd love you, Paulo, to talk about in terms of the impact on environment because of, as you well know, as you pointed out in your slide, how much pollution is caused through ultra-processing foods. So why don't we start with you, Paulo, and then Meg and Monica, if you wanted to weigh in on that, that would be great.
Bien, gracias.
Yes, thank you. Well, in fact, we have learned a lot from the tobacco industry strategies. And I think that based on this experience and the field of food products, we realize we cannot work with the industry. We don't have scientific arguments that is not founded, that are not founded, and they all produce, they're in a conflict of interest. And we see how the effects are environmental, social, etc. And also as regards reformulation, these are sort of traps or cheating in their arguments, obviously for the benefit of their gains and profits. And they are something that is very clear is that these products are not healthy. They are not environmentally friendly. And in fact, we cannot have a relationship and we cannot negotiate with this industry. And this we have learned from the experience with the tobacco industry.
Thanks, Paula. Monica, did you want to weigh in?
Yes, just to mention that I agree with Paula, it's difficult and we have the experience with tobacco industry that can be very helpful also to prepare us to the contacts with the other industry like big soda, big alcohol too. And it's important to have this in mind, but it's also, I think that I understand that's different for those industries that that don't have, for example, an FCTC, a Framework Convention Tobacco Control that we have with the Article 5.3. So I believe that's important also to discuss kind of frameworks for these other products. And I think that some groups discussed this kind of thing to having like a FCTC for other products too, in order to think about the priorities, to think about the limits on and the restrictions on the relationship with the food industry, for example. But as I mentioned in an answer that I put in the chat, I think that the best way to contribute is to regulating the food industry, their products, and also the alcohol industry, because well, I think we have to have clear rules for interaction with them, avoiding the conflict of interests, and not having a position of having them discussing the health policies or the public policies. And we can hear them, but not having them in the table to discuss the public policies. So I think that the best way that the public sector have to do their job is to regulate their products and trying to have the roles to avoid conflict of interests with these industries, because they try to use all these strategies to influence lawmaking and also regulation.
Yeah, and I think the story is that regulation levels the playing field. It makes it clear, the rules of the road clear for everyone across all industries, rather than trying to individualize cooperation with individual industries or individual actors within those industries. We're coming to the end of our time together, but I did want to, Meg, did you want to weigh in at all on that previous question?
No, I think they captured, I mean, I think Paulo said, to me, it's all about what is their goal? It's profit, and they're increasing their bottom line, right? The food industry and certainly the tobacco industry.
Thanks so much. Well, once again, please let me just thank our three panelists today. Fantastic presentations, wonderful discussion this morning with each of you. Thank you for taking your time to spend some time sharing with us your thoughts about this important issue. The final slide you'll see includes an email address for those of you who asked questions and may not have gotten them answered or answered to your satisfaction. So please reach out to Caroline. She'd be happy to take those questions and direct them to the appropriate panelists to get those back to you. I think we all learned a lot today, and we're looking forward to looking at more of these intersections, which I think are really critical to understanding just the whole notion, as you emphasized in your presentation, Monica, the commercialization of all of these industries and how they impact policy and the health of all. So thank you once again. Enjoy the